Springtime is here, and that means the pollens are populating. We are dealing with spring allergies, and a lot of Utahns are fighting those symptoms. Those symptoms actually mimic COVID-19, and so we wanted to look at what we're dealing with pollen-wise, how this season will shape up, and if those symptoms should mimic COVID-19 and what you can expect. So let's start off with our pollen count. This is our pollen count from earlier in the week, and as you can see, our grass and mold are either not there or low. Trees are high and there are no weeds, and there's a reason why. When it comes down to it, folks, we see different phases of the pollen season in Utah. Southern Utah can see pollen before the north because of temperatures, and so we know it's something we have to keep our eye on. The juniper and cedar trees in northern Utah are extremely high. Tree pollens are the first to hit. Other popular trees in Utah include that oak and ash tree. We see a lot of them when we're out and about. That scrub oak, their pollen very high this week. Cottonwood in the moderate category, we were seeing that peak the last couple of weeks. Birch, sycamore, and those maple and box elder trees in the low category. We're seeing moderate in the way of pollen for birch and sycamore, but a lot of tree pollens are something we're battling in the spring months, and that is the first type of pollen that we actually see. Here's a look at how those tree pollens progress. So February, March, and April. Yep, as early as February, we could see those tree pollens really starting to bloom. As we get into May through July, grass becomes our biggest pollen headache. And a lot of folks in Utah are actually allergic to grass. It's the major summer allergy. You know who you are because you battle it throughout the summer months and it wants to stick around. Our last phase of the pollens are weeds. July through October, they can hold on before we have that season-ending event, which is typically a snowstorm. And those weeds are also bushes. So a lot of us have ragweed or deal with sagebrush allergies in Utah, and that is what we see typically heading into fall. So the pollens take their time and they're on a timeline, and we are now battling the early ones, those tree pollens. So let's talk about Utah's most popular tree pollens. That includes those cottonwood, elm, and oaks. We know those are out there, and as we look at those weeds, we know ragweed, Russian thistle, sagebrush, plantain, and the quinopods. Quinopods are something that really give folks a hard time in the fall months. You'll see them on the ABC4 weather report frequently. We talk about pollen so you know what could be driving you crazy, and those quinopods come fall can be really rough.
Pollen can be such a pest. Allergy sufferers know this time of year can be so tough, but I've got a friend who's an expert, and everyone needs a good doctor on speed dial.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Harris. I work at Intermountain Allergy and Asthma in Draper.
I've interviewed Dr. Harris quite a bit. He's an expert on allergies and asthma, and we talked about the major difference between pollen season this year compared to pollen season last year.
So far, if you look back over years and years, this is probably a fairly traditional season, but I think it's significantly more bothersome than last year. Last year, it was wet and cold and rainy, and this year's been just the opposite. But we would have 2 or 3 days of high pollen, and then we'd get a storm, and it would be gone, and then it would come back, and then it would be gone. This year, we've had day after day after day of high or very high tree counts.
Our tree pollens will have a slight overlap with grass, and grass will slightly overlap with weeds. Sometimes, including this year, the tree pollens will start when it feels like we're still in the middle of winter.
The trees start typically late February or early March, and that's what happened this year. We saw the first pollen, as I recall, the end of the first week of March, which is fairly classic. And the trees tend to peak about now in mid to late April, and then they'll fade going into May, and the grass pollen starts early May, sometimes even late April if it's a warmer than typical spring. The grass peaks in June, and that usually is the peak of allergy misery in Utah, is the height of the grass season.
And pollens mix quite a bit. They can also travel hundreds of miles with the help of a good storm. When we have a southerly flow for days, you can bet the wind will bring those pollens from the south to the north.
It's known to travel for miles and miles on a good wind. Correct, you don't have to have trees in your yard to be bothered by those trees. You may see an increased amount if they're close. So you definitely see local differences in the pollen count, that if you have a line of elm trees in your neighborhood, you're going to see more elm pollen than someone 10 miles away, but the person 10 miles away is still going to see the elm, is still going to be affected by the pollen.
Warmer climates see those pollens earlier, so south central and southern Utah, as well as parts of eastern Utah, are ahead of us when it comes to which part of the pollen season they're dealing with.
My guess is that they are 3 to 4 weeks ahead of us. And probably about now, their grass season is well underway.
Also, you're not suffering alone. Dr. Harris says many Utahns are hurting during the summer months, and I'm sure you guessed why.
I would say above anything else, more people are made miserable by grass than just about anything else in the state.
Here's what's tricky as well. Allergy season is worse than last year and hitting during a pandemic. So many of us panic with the hint of a symptom. So how do you tell what your symptoms are related to?
Allergy symptoms the first few days can very closely mimic viral symptoms in some ways, and it is honestly tough sometimes for the first day or two to know, have I got a virus or are these allergies? Some of the things that you would look at that would give you a tip as to what's going on, super itchy eyes usually are not what you see with a virus, but are very common with allergies. People with asthma can have chest symptoms, can cough, but usually they'll say, this feels like my normal asthma, and it will get better with their inhalers.
There's also some things you can do to help out your allergies.
The first thing this time of year is you keep your doors and windows closed if you're an allergy sufferer, and you cool your home with central air. The other thing that helps is if you know that you're going to start having symptoms, get on your medicines now.
And it's not unusual to develop allergies either. You may never have had them before, but they'll pop up in your life.
Most allergies start in youth and peak in the late teens, maybe early 20s, and then they tend to taper off. But you see people who are just the opposite, that they didn't have allergies when they were younger, and now they're adults, and all of a sudden they'll notice that they're starting to have seasonal symptoms. It usually doesn't go from 0 to 60 in one season, but it can. So it's possible to not notice anything the last 2 or 3 years, and this year you're miserable.
For the remainder of pollen season, as well as while this pandemic continues, do your best to stay healthy. And again, look over this list of symptoms.
The pandemic has brought on so many different changes, and we're paying close attention to our symptoms. Now, allergy symptoms, some of them are similar to COVID-19 symptoms, but here's a look side by side so you know what to expect. If you're sneezing or you have that runny or stuffy nose, watery or itchy eyes, sinus congestion, you're not contagious, you're likely dealing with spring allergies. And if you look at those COVID-19 symptoms, you know that fever is telltale. The cough is something you have to pay attention to. We know it's highly contagious. Respiratory issues are an issue, and so that's something you have to look at very closely. But when you compare these side by side, we know at times that allergy symptoms can mimic the COVID-19 symptoms, so we want to be extremely careful. Allergies are something we deal with every spring and something we're going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future, especially as we get closer to these summer months with the grass pollen taking hold. At ABC4, we take that seriously, and we will always keep you posted on what pollens will be populating and driving you crazy. And of course, we just want to keep you in the know.